Alright class, in this video we're going to look at physical evidence, how to properly collect physical evidence using photography, crime scene sketches, how to handle the evidence and store it using legal and forensic considerations. Alright, first type of evidence, the main evidence that we're going to look at is called physical evidence. And physical evidence is any and all objects that could establish a crime has been committed or could provide a link between the crime and its victim or a crime and its perpetrator. A lot of evidence might say how someone died, other evidence might say who did it. When a crime scene has been found, you need an arriving or first responder to come in to make sure that they secure the area. Main goal is to get medical attention for a suspect or victim if someone is hurt but not died. Arrest the perpetrator if he's remaining, and secure the crime scene. Securing the crime scene is very important for forensic evidence later on. Once the first responder secured the crime scene, you'll have a lead investigator. They're going to determine the boundaries of the scene, putting police tape, do not cross, in a wide area. Also document and photograph obvious evidence to make sure that they're secure, and develop a strategy for systematic examination and documentation of the entire scene. Depending on the scene, they might have to use different viewpoints in how to collect their evidence. Typically, the next step will be the crime scene photographers. Crime scene must be unaltered and in the original state found by investigators. If anything moves during this stage, they cannot use the photographs as evidence in a courtroom. So typically, the forensic scientists want to get to the evidence right away so that it doesn't get contaminated, but the crime scene photographers would have to be first. They must be photographed from all necessary angles, wide ends, straight down, bird's eye view, whatever is necessary to get all the evidence. It must not be moved prior to photography because you cannot reintroduce into the scene for photo purposes. The defense of a trial will pretty much eat that up alive and then won't be used as evidence. After the photographers and videographers come in, you'll have a rough sketch and final sketch. In a rough sketch, objects are depicted from two fixed locations at the scene. That's in order to determine distances. Accurate measurements must be taken with a tape measure to know, let's say there's a blood stain in one section of a room and then the weapon on another section. You need to know the distances for times. Sketch evidence using letters or numbers and a legend at the bottom, just showing where each item is. And sketches always depict north. That's why you need a compass reading to make sure you know where north is. After the rough sketch has been done, then you'll have a finished or final sketch. That will show a precise depiction of the entire scene drawn to scale. If you have a piece of paper that is 8.5 by 11 and you're sketching a big room, you got to make sure that each inch might represent a few feet in the actual crime scene. Sometimes it's drawn with the aid of a computer, that's with CAD or computer aided drafting. After the sketch is done and the photographer is already in, they will do the crime scene search. Many different search points. One is called a spiral search, where they go in a spiral to make sure that they can double check for their evidence if they happen to miss it. You could also have a strip or line search where if there's numerous investigators, they could go in one straight line. This is typically done in a big field where there might be a lot of space to cover at once and they're looking for a dead body or other evidence. You also have what's called a grid search. It's essentially like a line search but in right angles to each other. That's again for a little smaller area than a big wide field, but necessary to get all evidence. Finally, you could have what's called quadrant or zone search. In this case, you're going to take 4 sections and search one section at a time until the entire area has been searched. This is when you have very detailed, specific evidence that you have to find in one section, and it also helps with the time of things happening. So for instance, let's say that there's a broken lamp right here, and then they realize that the blood splattered over here, and it took, say, a minute later. It's helpful to look at each search in that same time frame. Now, how do scientists collect evidence? The integrity of the evidence is very important. Different types of evidence has to be collected in different ways. Blood, hair, fibers, soil, and dust should be submitted intact, meaning not removed, so not removed from garments or surfaces, meaning If you see blood on a shirt, you should take the section of the shirt that has the blood stain and use that collected as evidence. When they're found on large objects, you could remove them carefully using forceps or swabs, however. For properly packaging evidence, you want to use forceps for picking them up. Don't touch them with your hands because that could cause cross-contamination and fingerprints. Use unbreakable plastic bottles with pressure lids for hair, glass fibers, and other trace evidence because plastic usually won't react with other evidence pieces. You can also use a manila envelope or druggist fold envelopes that fold in similar to a letter. For blood-stained material, you need to use wrapping paper around it, manila envelopes, and paper bags. The reason why I use paper bags is you want some airflow to go into the package. Airtight containers are never used. They could grow molds and destroy your evidence. Other species growing in your blood is what we want to not have because then you can't use it in your law trials. When collecting and packaging evidence, there needs to be a chain of custody. That's a list of all people who came into possession of any item of evidence because sometimes there might be a break in the chain of command, chain of custody, and that will not allow evidence to be taken properly. That can include collectors, carriers, lab technicians, investigators, medical examiners, and anyone that touches the evidence. When taking evidence, you need to consider the legal considerations. All removal of evidence from a person from the scene must conform to the Fourth Amendment that's in your Bill of Rights. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So if it's an unreasonable search, in many cases they'll need a warrant in order to collect evidence. If they do not have a warrant for certain evidence, they would be violating the Fourth Amendment, and then that evidence cannot be used in a courtroom. There are warrantless searches, however, which is done without a warrant, obviously. That's an existence of an emergency situation where the evidence might be changing during the collection. That prevents the immediate loss or destruction of evidence. And that's a search of a person or property following a lawful arrest. You cannot search before that arrest. You could also search by consent if someone is comfortable with it. The main court case that determined different legalities of searches was Michigan versus Tyler. In this case, there was a fire that destroyed a building. Evidence was collected the first day at the scene. After the initial entry, later entries into the building produced evidence. However, because that evidence came later entry, it was deemed inadmissible in court, meaning whenever you collect evidence for a warrant, it has to be on a specific time frame. Alright class, remember finally that all evidence needs to be collected properly or it cannot be used in a courtroom and the possible suspect might get away. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below.